Good morning all, and thank you for attending this very first session of our 4-session series in TruClient Tips and Tricks. We are thrilled and excited to have you here, our honored customers and friends, and we will be using this hour and our coming 3 sessions as well to do a deep dive into TruClient and maybe teaching you some things that you weren't aware of till now. With us today is Shlomi Nissim, TruClient R&D Manager, and myself, Lior, from the cost team. So, today's session will be a functional overview on TruClient. Okay, you might know some and most of things that we'll talk about here, but this is the very first session, and we are doing an introduction and overview. Our second session next week will be a deep dive into object identification. Our third session, the week following, will be on advanced scripting techniques. And we will conclude with a troubleshooting session. We'll conclude with a troubleshooting session on TruClient, and that will be our 4th and final session. Now, as with our previous webinars, we always encourage you to ask questions both online and offline. So please use the chat interface of the WebEx that you see here, and we will do our best to answer questions online, but don't panic. As Douglas Adams says, we are collecting any and all questions that you will input in the chat window, and we will publish a detailed Q&A session later on with all questions answered. So do not be alarmed if you don't get your answer right away. We are monitoring, collecting, and you will get your answer. That I can guarantee. So we will begin with our very first session of TruClient Functional Overview with Shlomi Nissim, TruClient R&D Manager. Shlomi, take it away.
Thank you, Lior. Hi, everyone, and thanks a lot for dedicating the time to come and learn about TruClient. As Lior mentioned, today's session is going to be kind of a functional overview. I'm not going to drill down into the details. Basically, the goal is to expose you to the various features and capabilities that TruClient has to offer. From my experience with working with customers, I've realized that a lot of the functionality is actually not well known. So I'd like to expose you guys to that and to provide some tips and techniques of how to use TruClient more effectively. The upcoming sessions will provide kind of more of a deep dive into these areas. So I truly recommend attending all of the sessions in order to get a complete picture of how to use TruClient. But let's first start with why TruClient was invented at all and why TruClient is relevant in today's web-based applications world. So as you can see, like in the late 90s, the trends and the beginning of the 2000s, the trends around the web-based applications were growing, but it was not as frequent as you can see at the end of this chart. Basically, the world has realized that the web is the standard platform that can enable sharing knowledge and building applications that can serve distributed organizations that have locations across continents and in different areas of the world. And as a result, more and more applications were built on top of the web, and more logic was needed in order to be facilitated in those applications. So when the need came, eventually standardization came into place. So the W3 consortium started standardizing more and more standards around web-based applications, which basically the browser vendors had to comply with. And as well as at the same time, a lot of innovators and software companies and individuals started building a lot of JavaScript libraries that provide more and more capabilities. All this change, which kind of happened in the last decade or so, changed the world and basically made scripting in the HTTP level much more difficult than it used to be in the past. So TruClient basically is a browser-based virtual user. It's an extension in the browser that works in the DOM level. It doesn't work in the HTTP level. So unlike Web HTTP, which has an engine that basically simulates the HTTP request and responses that happen as a result of working with a real browser, TruClient doesn't emulate that. TruClient basically activates the operations that the user is doing on the browser in the same way the user is doing it. So basically each TruClient virtual user equals to a real browser process which is running. The script does not require correlations, which makes it much simpler to create, but not completely out of the box. It still requires expertise and still requires understanding, and we will cover the details in part of it in this session and others in subsequent ones. But generally speaking, it is much easier than Web HTTP scripting. And the downside of it is that the footprint of the virtual user is much larger. And as a result, you can run much less virtual users on the same load generator. So there is some kind of a trade-off, but you can get, with TruClient, you can get also more of an end user experience measurement as opposed to the Web HTTP level, which you get only the traffic oriented measurements. So TruClient basically has 3 different protocols which are available from Vuegen and from other and from TruClient standalone as well. The first one, the most left one, is TruClient Web. Basically allows you to create scripts using one of the 3 browsers mentioned over here, Firefox, IE, or Chromium. You have also the option to create scripts for mobile-based applications. So either it is with the native mobile solution, which is actually integrated with the HPE Mobile Center, where the virtual user actually runs on a real mobile device, either a phone or a tablet, or you can create a script with a mobile web solution, which is basically, it runs on a regular browser, only that browser basically sends all the HTTP requests with the user agent set to a specific mobile device that you chose, which means that basically we mislead the server to think that we are connecting from a real mobile device, and web-based applications that were built to provide an interface also for a mobile application. So those will be rendered as such, and you will see that while working with mobile web. So if you so it's a very valid solution in order to validate mobile-based applications. However, the downside of using mobile web is just the virtual user runs on a regular load generator, while in the native mobile it runs on a real mobile device. So mobile web is more oriented to validating the server only. Native mobile is more oriented to validate also the client. So my demo later on is going to focus more on TruClient web. I just want to emphasize that in terms of the end user experience while working with TruClient, TruClient web and TruClient mobile web are basically identical in terms of the end user experience. The end user experience is pretty much the same also with the TruClient native mobile, but there are nuances that are specific to Mobile Center in the native mobile solution. So it's a bit different, but the overall end user experience is pretty much the same. Okay, let's move on to a demo. Basically, I'll try to cover now the various capabilities and features that we have in TruClient. So I'll just record this URL. Sorry. Let's create a new script. And in Vuegen, as you can see, I can create either, this is, by the way, this is a 12.53 version, which I truly recommend upgrading to it. You have TruClient web protocol, and then TruClient mobile web, which I just mentioned, and TruClient native mobile. I'm going to choose TruClient web. I'm going to create a new script. When you create a new script, a TruClient web script, you have this select box in Vuegen toolbar, which allows you basically to select in which browser you would like to develop your script. So if you wish to create a script that runs on all browsers, it is possible. I mean, you can record it in one of the browsers and replay in any of them. If this is your requirement, just make sure that before you run it from controller or from Performance Center or from StromRunner, then make sure that you run it in interactive mode in each one of the browsers in order to make sure that it runs correctly. I'll choose Firefox. It's my personal preferences, although each one of the R&D teams has a different preference. And I'll explain a bit about the user interface for those who are not familiar with TruClient and haven't been using it so far. So it's a regular browser, only that TruClient comes with its own browser copy in order to make sure that the browser is not being upgraded by mistake and changes, and then it might cause some compatibility issues with our extension. So the only difference between a regular browser, as you can see from the TruClient browser, is the fact that it has this sidebar. This sidebar is basically where your script is being recorded and constructed. The address bar is a regular address bar, and in here is basically where the application will be loaded. So just by clicking enter, I'm browsing to this URL. It's not in vain that I chose to use this URL. I would like to encourage all of you to basically use, this is the Hewlett Packard Enterprise community forums. And you have here the performance engineering homepage. Basically, all of the performance engineering products have forums in here that are accessible. So either support forums or practitioners forum, and some a blog and some best practices and methodologies that we publish over here. So we publish a lot of valuable information, and there are also users that are coming over here and asking questions, and the R&D teams are monitoring these forums on a day-to-day basis and answering questions as fast as possible. as much as possible. I mean, sometimes it's impossible to assist only by answering the forum itself. So I truly encourage you guys to look for it and to participate. So let's record a simple script. As you can see, when I click the record button, immediately the initial navigation happened. Let's go to the LoadRunner practitioners forum, and there is an issue here, TruClient with silent authentication, for example. So let's go in here, and that will do for now. As you can see, this is me. I answered this question, and this one is pretty basic actually. So we have the script already set up. We can replay that. Let's replay it for just to see how it looks like. So basically the navigation happens. When TruClient replays the script for the first replay, each step basically gets an end event being assigned. So the first replay of the script is usually it's longer. It's longer, so it's recommended not to skip and not to replay the script directly from controller without having end events assigned to the steps. I'll cover that a bit later, and we'll cover it in more details in the next webinars. But basically here you can see that the script was already replayed, and this is obviously a very basic and easy script. And the scripts that you guys are creating are much more complex, and I've been supporting a lot of customers, and I've seen the challenges that you are tackling. We will tackle these challenges in also part of these challenges in the next webinars. Right now I would like to focus on making sure that you guys are familiar with all the capabilities. So let's start with just trying to do the same without actually recording what we did over here. So let's just take, you need to keep in mind that the TruClient, basically, since it runs in the browser, you can basically operate it from the browser itself. So in here, I don't really need to, like if I want to debug something, I don't really need to replay the script unless it's going to make it faster for me. I can do the operations also manually, like just clicking over here, it will do. Clicking manually over here, it will do the same thing. And if I click on that, it will do the same thing. And if I have an issue, like something is not working for me over here, I can just reach into that page and I can start working on it. So let's talk a bit about the interactive editing of the script. So as opposed to other protocols in LoadRunner and in the performance engineering product, usually you record and then you get your script and you start editing it, but you cannot record additional content on top of it. In TruClient, it's a bit different. You can record right now and the steps will be recorded after it. Let's say I'm clicking that, for example. So a step is added. I'm stopping recording. So let me delete that. I can also use the toolbox over here in order to control the script and edit it. So the most important steps are actually the generic object action and generic browser action. Let me explain something about it because I believe this is really important. So the first thing is about the generic browser action. The generic browser action is a step that basically performs an action on the browser itself. So any operation that is related to the browser. By default, when you drop a step like that from the toolbox to the sidebar, the action which is selected is navigate to a location, just like was recorded over here. So if I'll just copy this URL and I'll paste it over here, and I'll replay this step right now, it will be identical to actually recording it. Okay, so it is possible. But if I want to do something else, I can easily do that like that. I can just open the action toolbox, and I can repurpose this action to do like go back, for example. So if I'm doing a go back right now, the browser will simply go back. Go forward, same thing. So it's as easy as that. You don't need to stick always to the default action. You can repurpose it to do what you want. A lot of times, and we will probably talk about it in the troubleshooting section, you can reload the page and you can get your content refreshed or something like that. So it is a very useful tool. So basically, this is what the generic browser action is doing. It can be used in order to address all sorts of actions that are related to the browser, that the browser triggers them. So the other important step is the generic object action. A generic object action is basically it's targeted to perform operations on the application itself. So whatever, like any operation which is in the DOM level, the document object model level, this is what we are seeing over here eventually, can be controlled by the generic object action. So if I want to click, for example, on this link, I can just select that object, and then I can simply click it. When I replay that from here, it will perform this operation about us. And as I said earlier, in the first replay of any step, TruClient analyzes the end event. So you see before it was not yet set, and then it was assigned automatically to document loaded. This was selected right now. So I can let me put the application back in the right context in order to get this link available to me. I can repurpose this action. So I can just, like, I don't know, let's say double click it. It is possible, and I'm simulating a double click. Eventually the behavior is going to be the same. Now if I want if I'm going to select a different object, so as opposed to the browser object that we talked about earlier, the generic browser action, where the browser always have the same set of actions available and you can always apply them, of course depending on whether it makes sense or not. When it comes to the application objects, then if I'm choosing a different element, like a list box, for example, the actions that are going to be available are not necessarily identical to what we are seeing over here for a link. A link supports these actions. Some of them make sense, some of them not. I mean, you will not be able to do anything with it. Like for example, if you try to drag this link, so unless the application, your application basically supports that for that particular link, nothing will happen. It will not be dragged. But a link, generally speaking, supports being dragged. While a list box allows actions such as selecting a value from the list. So I can select like either one of the values by ordinal, for example, or by text, and then I can select a different action. I can also decide that I don't want to select something from there. I can just click it. When I'm going to click it, it will open. It will not select any item, but it will open. So basically what I'm trying to explain over here is that you can construct your script manually, and you do not necessarily need to record it. It's not like recording is not good. Recording is good. It saves time. You don't need to think about it and so on. But once you have a script already set up with a lot of steps and with a lot of logic inside it, I found it personally much easier to enhance it and to tweak it by just working with drag and drop of steps from here, and making sure that the step is located in the right way and repurposing the action. So I wanted you to be aware of that because it's a very powerful tool when you're working with TruClient. It's much easier. There are a lot of more steps over here that allows you to verify content and to wait for a specific object to appear on screen, to control the branching in the script itself. Like if something exists, then you can do that, or do something else. You can loop and wait until something appears. We will cover something like some of these logics we will cover in the next meeting. And you can also simply run some logic of your own. I mean, you can write JavaScript code and interact with the application and do everything using JavaScript code and without even utilizing the built-in steps and capabilities of TruClient. So TruClient was built from one point of view, it was built in order to provide some automatic mechanisms, which I'll cover shortly, in order to shorten the time to create a script, but it is also fully customizable to do whatever you want without even using what TruClient has to offer. So you can take it to a completely different direction than what you were probably familiar so far. Okay, let's talk about the out-of-the-box capabilities that TruClient has to offer. When scripting in the UI level, which is what we're doing over here, we basically simulate clicks, navigation, things like that, things that the user is doing in order to interact with applications. There are two main challenges. The first challenge is to identify the elements in the application which we would like to perform action on. And the second challenge is basically to synchronize between the script steps in order to make sure that when we are trying to perform an action, the application is actually in the right state and it's ready to perform that action. Those of you who have some experience with scripting in Citrix protocol or RDP or any other UI level protocol will probably relate to what I said right now. TruClient basically comes with the two automatic mechanisms that allows trying to simplify and simplify the manual work that needs to be done in order to overcome these two challenges. So first of all, for the object identification, which we will cover in the next webinar in more details, there are four object identification methods. The first one, the automatic one, which basically identified the object, the elements in the application using unique algorithm developed at HPE. Usually it's been selected as the default, and personally I would keep it as is, as long as you don't need to identify an object with some dynamic content inside it, or in case you analyze and identify that it's not the right way to go and you need to change it to something else. I've seen a lot of users categorically changing to XPath because they would like to control what's going on. I'm fine. I'm also a free control. I mean, I wanna know what my tool is doing, but sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes not. I will try to give some best practices in the next session when to use which identification method. But basically, as you can see, if you choose XPath, TruClient provides an XPath out of the box, so you don't need to go and write the XPath on your own. And also, there is a method which we call descriptors, which is kind of more of key value kind of identification, which you can also allow add additional conditions and enhance this identification with various different properties. So I'll just cancel that in order not to ruin it. And you can also identify an object using JavaScript code. You can write your own JavaScript code, and I'll show you an example for something like that in the next session. So basically, this is for object identification. For synchronizing between the steps, then TruClient, as I've already mentioned, uses an automatic end event calculation. But you can also manually change this the end event according to your observation and according to your need. Generally speaking, like with the object identification, my recommendation is not to change the automatically selected value unless one, it's not working, two, you would like to measure something else than what was automatically selected. So when I'm saying to measure something else, basically I'm hinting that the end events have an influence on the transaction response time. So I'll cover that shortly. I just want to continue with the explanation of how the step is working. Basically, a TruClient step, when it starts running, the first thing that TruClient is doing is identify the object on which the action is being performed. Okay, so for a browser-related step, like the generic browser action step, all these steps, the object on which the action is being performed is the browser itself. The browser is always there, so it is really fast to find it. We don't really need to spend time on finding it, and we perform the action immediately. After the action is being performed, basically to perform the action means, like, if I want to navigate somewhere, it's just like doing that, clicking on the triggering the browser to navigate to that page. So if, for example, the end event is set to action completed, then what TruClient considers is just like triggering that navigation, and TruClient will not wait for anything else that is happening as a result. Like if you have a page that takes a lot of time to load and the end event is action completed, TruClient will just move on to the next step, which means that after the object is identified, the action is being triggered and performed, and then TruClient waits until the end event is triggered. Once the end event was triggered, TruClient moves to the next step until basically, if the end event was not triggered, TruClient will wait without doing anything at that time, actually, without doing anything, and just waiting for that event to be triggered until either it will happen or a step timeout will occur. So this is basically the cycle of how a step is running. The same way in here, the object is an object in the application. So the first thing is basically to identify the object. So actually, for when I'm trying to troubleshoot object identification issues, the first thing that I'm doing an highlight in order to see if the object is identified. And this is basically the first step. TruClient, during replay, it's not trying to highlight an object, but it's trying to locate it. So this is the first thing that it's being done, and then the action is being performed and waiting for the end event to happen. This is it. Now, the end events, some of it are basically being triggered by the browser itself, like document loaded, DOM content loaded, dialog that was opened, and also the network completed and synchronous network completed. all these are actually triggered by the browser. Only action completed is triggered by TruClient code itself, irrespective to what the browser or the application is sending. Document loaded, DOM content loaded is basically just TruClient listens to one event that is supposed to be triggered. Dialog opened, we are listening to several events, but if one of them happened, then it is triggered. With step network completed and step synchronous network completed, basically TruClient waits for a bunch of HTTP responses to finish, and then after they are finished, TruClient itself triggers. So the HTTP responses, TruClient listens to the browser that basically triggers the fact that an HTTP response occurred. But then TruClient concludes that the network is completed, and then it fires an event of its own in order to finalize the step and move on to the next step. Okay, so far so good, I hope. I'll move on to explain a bit what step level is. So I've seen many users moving the step levels to level 3 and working this way. When I ask them always, why do you do that? Why do you change the level to level 3? So oftentimes the response that I hear is that it improves the object identification. So I want to dismiss that belief. This level has nothing to do with object identification. It does not improve the robustness of the script. On the contrary, it will reduce the robustness of the script, and it will basically be more likely to fail. The script will be more likely to fail if you set it to run in level 3. This control over here in the bar, it has two purposes. The first purpose is basically, if you can see right now, the step numbering is 1, 3, 5. So we have a few steps that are not visible. If I'm changing to level 2, I'm seeing also step number 4. If I'm changing to level 3, I see step number 2, number 4, number 6, and even number 7. And if I'm going to expand this group over here, I'm going to see some more steps, like 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of them. If you so basically this bar over here exposes, makes all the steps that are marked in level 3 or lower than that, it makes it visible. TruClient has logic during recording which is mainly oriented for mouse overs to determine whether the mouse over step is required in order to run the script successfully, or we can just afford placing it in a lower level in order not to replay that as part of the script. So usually mouse over steps are not very stable, I would say. They might create some issues while doing them, and therefore it is recommended to always stick with level 1. So unless you really need a mouse over step, then if you think that like, I don't know, this step, for example, fails because I don't know, a menu was not open. Let's see an example for that. I don't have a quick example for that right now, but here, like this one, for example. If I'm not going, when I'm doing this mouse over, this menu pops up immediately. So if I don't have this mouse over step that triggers this menu to open, and I don't know, I would like to click that link, then the step that tries to click the link might fail because this menu is not open right now. So then you need to expose that mouse over. How can you do that? You can do that in one of two ways. One way is to move the script to level 3, identify which step opens that menu, triggers that menu, then change that to level 1 because this is what you needed, and then put the script back to level 1, and you're done. So right now you have the right step. Of course, in this case, this is not really needed, so I'm just going to revert that or maybe even delete it all. But in a real use case, it might be needed. It might be required. There is another option that you just saw earlier. Just basically drag a generic object action, choose the element on which you want to do the operation, and as you already know, you can change the action from click to mouse over, and you are done. So generally speaking, you don't really need to switch the script to level 3. If you already done it, I truly recommend putting it back to level 1 and maybe even getting rid of all the level 2, level 3 steps, because in most cases they are not really needed. So this is in order to explain the script levels. Let's talk a bit about transactions. So you can define a transaction in TruClient simply by right-clicking a specific step or several steps and surround it with transaction. You can give it a name, and you get this indicator. A transaction can be edited also from the transaction editor. I'm just clicking this button in the toolbar. This dialog opens, and I can add another transaction, some logic. Just for the example, I'm selecting the step that I would like the transaction to start from, and I'm selecting the step that I would like the transaction to end at, and that's it. I can also control the events that determines when TruClient will start measuring the time. I do not recommend doing that. I recommend sticking with the default events. So that's it regarding transaction. There is one more option that you can use. If you want to control the transaction manually, you can just drop an evaluate JavaScript step and then use JavaScript API that TruClient exposes. And you see tc.start transaction, you give it a name. That's it, and a transaction will start. And of course you need to end this transaction, and that can be done again with an evaluate JavaScript step. Just end transaction, and just you need to make sure that you specify the pass criteria, like this, the status of the transaction. It can be either pass, fail, or auto. Now, of course, you need to have steps inside it, so something will be measured. So it will be done this way. I didn't find many use cases that are required, but I'm just sharing this information so you know that. Of course, there are a lot of more APIs over here, so I truly recommend exploring that. You see tc dot, you have a lot of that. You have also some utilities. We will cover those in the third session. Okay, so this is in regards to transactions. Let's talk a bit about parameters. I've heard people asking about how do I create a parameter in a TruClient script. So it's very simple. It's just like any other protocol. I'm just going to Vuegen, to the parameter list, defining a parameter, creating a table. Let's edit with Notepad, going to be easier. Let's do value 1, value 2. I can create multiple columns. Whatever you are regular to do, it's fine. Do it as you do. You can create all sorts of different parameter types, everything. The only difference between TruClient and other protocols in that regards is the way you consume this parameter. So let's take something from here. Let's take like this coordinate, for example. If I wanted it to be a parameter, I would just change this toggle in the argument section from plain value either to JavaScript or a parameter. Like, for example, in this case, if I'm changing that to a parameter, then I can just write the name of my parameter. In this case, I need, of course, to make sure that the value in here makes sense. So I'm gonna put it like that, and that's it. I can do something else. I can change it to JavaScript. That toggle with parameter was just introduced in 12.53. Usually it was done like that: tc.getParam, and then my param. That's it. So this is what you do in order to work with parameters. You can also replace a value with parameter, just like by selecting the value, create new parameter from selection, giving it a name, and that's it. Now when you go over here, you will see the value in here, which basically allows you to replay the script. It will do the same, of course, only that the value is being taken from a parameter file. Okay, so far the most important features were covered. Let me cover a bit more shortly. I've seen many scripts of yours that are very long, of course, not as this dummy script like mine. So I would like to show you the capabilities of creating a more modular script. I mean, divide the logic among different actions. So you can create different actions. You can name them as you wish. And of course, give it a meaningful name. And then you can switch with these actions this way. And basically, you can move logic or from one action to another. That can ease your day-to-day work on the scripts, because the actions will basically allow you to work, like using multiple actions will allow you to work with a less dense sidebar, with less logic in each one of the actions. So this is one option. Another option is to use function libraries. So you can use a function library, and you can make it either a local one. You can see that Ohm icon identifier over here, and you can give it a name. And a function library basically allows you to share logic in between inside the script, like if you have several different actions that and a specific operation has to be done in all of them or in some of them, you can create a function and refer to this function from one of the actions or more using the call function step. So that basically allows you to create a script which is more modular, and you can reuse code. You can also export this function and make it a global function. And then you can import this function to other scripts as well. And by that, you can basically share data between scripts. You just need to make sure that this global function is located in a location which is accessible from all the load generators in order to make sure that it works correctly. So this is for function libraries. Again, it's another measure that allows you to divide logic and make your sidebar more readable and easier to work with. Another important feature is snapshots. So in here we have the recording snapshots. You can see interactive snapshots. This feature is important more, at least from my experience, not necessarily while working with the script interactively, but rather when you run it from controller. So then whenever there is a problem, you get a replay snapshot on error. That is very important in order to troubleshoot issues, and we will cover that in a troubleshooting session. So this is for the snapshots. Last feature, which I'll cover in more details in the last webinar, and in here I just mentioned it briefly, is event handlers. Event handlers is actually a feature that enables you to handle unpredictable behavior. You know that something will happen. A survey window will pop up, or some dialogue will pop up, and you do not know exactly when, but you do know that it will be popped up. So you can actually scope from which step to which step you expect this unpredictable behavior to happen. And then you mark an indicator that you mark also an indicator that instruct TruClient that unpredictable behavior occurred. Once this indicator can be either a regular DOM element or a dialogue, a browser dialogue. If each one of those happened and you choose that object, basically you can choose which handler will handle that unpredictable behavior. And just as mentioned, this unpredictable behavior usually just like jeopardize the script stability and prevents it from running. So that function library, that handler, will probably dismiss it and allow the rest of the script to continue working correctly. So that's it for the high-level functional overview. I know that it was a bit overloaded with information. You have the recording in order to listen to that offline. I truly hope that you will join to the next webinars, because again, as far as I see it, it's at the end of the day, it requires the all 4 webinars in order to really start getting a good basis on TruClient. I want to know that there are 2 online resources that are extremely valuable for you. The TruClient LinkedIn group and the performance engineering community, as I mentioned earlier. These 2 resources are being monitored by R&D on a day-to-day basis, and they are also being monitored by our support team. So I truly encourage you to ask questions over there, and we'll do our best to assist. I'm moving the stage back to Lior. Thanks a lot for attending.
Thank you very much, Lomi. Thank you for this enriching session. And thank you all for attending. I would like to briefly go over our next sessions. Our next session, scheduled for July 21st, will be, as I mentioned, a deep dive into object identification. Our third session, scheduled for July 28th, will be on advanced scripting techniques. And our fourth session, and our most important one, is troubleshooting, scheduled for August 2nd. Additionally, if you haven't registered yet, I encourage you to register to our webinar next week on July 19th regarding StromRunner Load. Okay, if you haven't registered by now, feel free to email us at plv_cost@hpe.com with SRL webinar in the subject line. So, no time actually for Q&A online, but we want to thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today. We hope you found it useful and beneficial, and we really hope to see you in our next session next week. So cheers, have a great day, and bye-bye now.